Thank you very much, Joan. Thank you to all four of our speakers. And I think the theme that came through from all four of you was the need to create purpose. And actually, if I could start with you, Tammy, because you came up with that very arresting phrase, create an environment in which people want to do things. We heard from Guillaume, most people are not interested. And as much as we're talking about meaning, as much as all of us are talking about purpose, most people in our organizations are just not seeing it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think basically it's because we're using an industrial model of leadership to try to encourage this level of emotional commitment, and it doesn't work. The two are very different. If you are telling people, this is what I want you to do, and I'm going to watch you do it because I don't really trust that you're going to do it right, you've killed it right there. And that's at the heart, I think, of a lot of the engagement scores we see. The minute you step back and realize that your job is simply to create this wonderful environment in much the same way you described. In fact, one of my favorite phrases that you said was something about getting everybody, or I don't remember quite how you worded it, but your average person. And that, to me, is where we need to really be imagining, is how do we get every single person, the average person, to want to give their very best to our organization. And that's through this whole idea of creating a trust-based, a respectful, an adult-based, engaging environment.
Well, Sydney, let me bring you in here because if we talk about meaning and purpose, if we go back 100 years when people worked in factories, when they worked in vast offices, people didn't talk about meaning and purpose. People talked about basically getting enough money to keep their families together, to feed themselves. And I think Joan raised this absolutely vital point. What many young people coming into the workforce today are really haunted by is financial insecurity. They're just not seeing those opportunities that my generation, the baby boomer generation, took for granted, that if you had a decent job, you could buy a place to stay or rent a decent place to stay, you could bring up your children would have a better life than you would. And people are plagued by financial insecurity. Is that not a real problem? We can talk about enabling our organizations. If people think, I'm working for this organization which is not even paying me enough to live a decent life, is that not a real problem? And is that not the root of our problems?
There's no question that people need money, people need to live. But I've got plenty of students that, in fact, and it's not just my students, every business school, you look at the data on students and the jobs they take, they will overwhelmingly choose the jobs that create opportunities for them, that give them more personal responsibility, leaving money on the table. I'm not saying that's everyone, but that's certainly a big part of it. So, and the other thing about millennials, or actually anyone, because I think what all of us, like the baby boomer generation, have learned from millennials is, hey, they got some good ideas about this. We should be taking care of ourselves and demanding more. And so we have a gig economy, we have a freelance economy. There are a lot of options on the table. So if you can't offer millennials or anyone else an opportunity that's exciting, they've got more options now than they ever had before.
Do you think that's true, Joan? They can walk, can they?
Well, I think that actually it's the opposite of what HR professionals think. I think that we need to radically disrupt the idea that HR is the only one responsible for every employee's health, wealth, and growth. I know that millennials are a lot stickier than you think that they are, and the reason is they can't afford to leave a lot of times, but they're also hopeful that a company is going to invest in their growth. And I think the one thing to the point about purpose, we also need to disrupt onboarding. We need to start teaching new talent as soon as they walk in the door, what is our business really about? Not a 2-hour PowerPoint show about your benefits. You really need to talk to them about how the business functions, the impact it makes through its products or services. And I feel like that's how you can start to make a connection between something that's purposeful for you and the work that you're a part of.
Kim, I'm very interested in how you view this because you've been through this process, and I'm just very interested in how far do you think you are along that road of engaging your employees in the way that you want to engage them?
So that is quite a challenging question because I don't think there is an end to that road, right? As you progress, the end post keeps moving further. And I think that's like anything else that we do in business, is as you make progress on certain front, someone else or the environment is sort of pushing you to go further. So how do you know that you're actually making progress? And I think it's simple, tangible things. If I may maybe share with you a little anecdote that sometimes the intentions are great, but maybe the execution's not intentional enough. A couple of months ago, I was with a newly named CEO of a large car manufacturer here in Germany. And in that company, there is an issue around engagement and trust. And so he was sharing with me that one of his very first things that he wanted to do was to actually have lunch with the employees in the employee cafeteria. That sounds really good, right? But he realized very quickly that every time he went to the cafeteria, there was like a movement of people to move away from him. And if he was to pick a table where he was alone, no one would come. And if he was to pick a table where there were people, they would eat really quickly and then go, right? Because there was too much of a contrast between that genuine attempt, and I know him, he's a very genuine man, to do that, but the fact that people that are smart actually could see his executive building at the end of the parking lot with 3 guards and 2 security lines and so on. So to be able to measure progress, you have to start to ensure that you think about not just the progress you're making with the employees, but the progress you're making with yourself, right? In how you are actually being more intentional about your own behavior, so you can get everyone to sort of feel comfortable, not have any dissonance that what you're trying to do is not really fitting into the overall environment of the company.
There's some fascinating points in, and I'd like to bring them up, but I just want to ask one thing about Steelcase. When people arrive, this is picking up Joan's point, what do you tell them the purpose of Steelcase is?
So our purpose is to actually try to get the best out of the people at work, right? So we say it's unlocking human promise at work, which means really ensuring that in the environment where people have to work with each other, think, so on, that they feel that they are supported and they can get the best out of their potential. So that's a fairly high bar, but you can easily actually translate it into very tangible things that people can do. And one is better understanding the nature of work. So understanding work, workers, and the workplace is probably the first thing that we start to help our new employees better understand.
Okay. Sydney, I'm going to come to you in a second, Tammy, but as you've written so extensively about great bosses, Sydney, how do they break down the barriers that Guillaume talks about?
It's very interesting to hear the examples of the physical space, because that's absolutely one of the characteristics of these super bosses. They hate hierarchy. They hate bureaucracy. They hate formality. They try to create these kind of close relationships. But then I was listening to you, and I'm thinking, boy, what would Weber say about all of this? I mean, he invented the concept of bureaucracy as a solution to chaos. And now we are advocating a world of chaos. And I think people really running companies like you might wonder, what are we all talking about? So I'm curious to kind of put the question back to you and ask, how, in these open office spaces and having CEOs and senior executives sitting with people, hopefully they're not eating too quick and leaving, how do you maintain some type of kind of organization in the classic sense of the word?
So you need a clear purpose. That's the first piece, right? So you can't organize something if you don't have a clear purpose, and it's not that easy. Your question is a very profound one, because we thought for a long time, what is the purpose of our organization? So if it's to make things, there are thousands of companies that make really beautiful things, right? Maybe better, maybe not as good, but the purpose then becomes creating better environment for the people to work in a smarter way. So once you have the purpose figured out, then you also need to face up the reality that 100% of your day is not dedicated to having casual interaction with everyone. So it's about providing a palette of space like we have in universities. There are places to study, there are places to think, there are places to do teamwork, there are places to teach, places to learn, places to relax. And leaders also need to have a palette of space, so you can at certain times go into a place and then send some signals that it's okay to be interrupted. So for example, you can have no door to that space, or you can have a green light, or you can be in a more remote place but still in the open. And there are moments where you also really need to get into deep work. And we know from neuroscience that deep work is not an easy state, to reach, it takes a long time to actually get into your thoughts, and it's really easy to get disrupted. So leaders need that as much as all our teammates. So it's a palette of solutions.
Another way to put that, when I first ran a department at the Financial Times, my first experience in senior management, a good friend of mine who's been running her own business for many years said, sit with your people, talk to them, but also make sure that you go away for long enough to give them a chance to complain about you.
That's great.
Tammy, how do you think we break down these barriers?
Well, I think that one of the critical things I'd like to just flag for us is the word purpose and its meaning, because I think there are some words in business which frankly make people nauseous. And purpose could be one of those if it's overused. And the problem is people often think that a purpose has to be save the world kind of purpose. But the reality is it doesn't. A purpose is simply a statement about who you are as an organization, what makes you special. And in that sense, what I like to think of is the purpose implies what you're promising, both to your customers and your employees, and then you have to deliver on it. So how do you break down the barriers? You deliver on the expected promise, the implied promise. So Steelcase has a purpose which is out unlocking the value in the workplace of the worker. That's great. It actually works for their customers, and it sends a very clear signal of what you would expect if you were an employee there. I get that. I could imagine what I would gain from being an employee at Steelcase. And if I went there and they in fact encouraged me to grow and develop, I would feel great because my promise would have been fulfilled. And on the other hand, if they didn't, I'd be very disengaged because they would have broken the promise. What I've found from my research is that you can have a whole variety of purposes. You don't all have to save the world. So ExxonMobil, for example's purpose, I think maybe they call it their principles, are something about having high ethical and safety standards. That may not sound very inspiring. It certainly creates, I think, an expectation around structure and rules. And in fact, that's exactly what ExxonMobil is all about: structure, rules, process, double check, safety check. The people who choose to work there love it. And so that's really the key. It's not that you have to be any one thing, but you have to know who you are. And you have to promise something to your employees and then keep your promise, so that what they expect when they join you is what they actually find.
Joan, you've been listening to this, and you've been listening to us talking about how leaders need to break down barriers. You know, leaders in a way as your friends, leaders who are providing a purpose, leaders who are explaining to you while you were there, why you were there. When you look at the cohort of people that you are talking about,
Right.
How do they feel about this? Do they say, yep, I'm seeing that?
No, I mean, it's a flat no. I mean, this is why I'm advocating for really rethinking about the values that you truly promote in your organization, the ones that are rewarded and recognized, not the ones that are on, a nice piece of paper on the wall. So a real strategy in terms of inclusive behaviors is to apply this a diversity lens on the business, which means you're going to have people that look and feel and act different with you in every setting. So what young people today are seeing is, I don't see somebody that looks like me, not my same background, or ethnicity, or gender, or identity. And so until you get there, and I know how extraordinarily hard that is. We work inside some of the largest global organizations. I know how hard it is to change the representation, but in the meantime, you can bring the people into the room. You can make sure that you have that diverse perspective in every strategy meeting as you talk about things not just about recruiting, but about business development, discovering new markets, new business opportunities. And so one of the strategies I said is, as a leader, you're still only, the dimensions that you bring to the table of your personal experiences. Leverage employee resource groups, those affinity groups like women's networks and African American network, to help employees in your company have a voice about the future of your business. And that's ultimately going to make them more proud of the place that they're working for, and then they're going to encourage their friends and others that look like them and think like them, but also have diverse perspectives. What millennials tell me all the time is, I don't want to work for a company where all my friends aren't welcome. So think about that. And I think that that's, again, reflected in the type of leadership behaviors that are role modeled day after day by their bosses.
So again, as Joan has said, achieving this diversity, not just of backgrounds, of ethnicities, of genders, but also of outlooks, is a very difficult and long-term task. How far have you gone in that process? How important is it to you?
It is very important, and it's, I think, maybe a little easier in a global organization than in a national organization, because you end up having a lot of talent that pops up through the different places around the world. For example, more than a third of our executive committees is not from North America. Close to 40% are women, and it's really because they raise through the performance of the business and the parts of the world where they join for. But we have tools also at our disposal, because I think hierarchy, you made the comment earlier, hierarchy is not just the people that are sitting on the executive committee, they're the visible people in the company. So organizations have a lot of leverage to nominate diverse individuals, younger, female, from different ethnic background, from different lifestyle choices, to actually lead big projects and to be visible in the company, to be part of the voice of the company, to lead big projects like transformation, for example. So I think these levers, they need to be better used, and not necessarily just to rely on the voice of the top leaders.
Right. We're coming pretty much towards the end, but I just wanted to just explore one final thing, and that is, Gil mentioned something very important, is that I can remember a time when the chief executive, you came into work and there was a letter from the chief executive on everybody's desk. Wow, this is a big moment, something big has happened. Now, as we've heard, you don't even open the emails. You might look at them, you might just look at the subject field. How can top people, how can bosses, starting with you, Sydney, and let's just quickly go through this, just a couple of seconds from each of you. What's the best way to get your message across?
Number one, be there in front of people, talk to them, walk the halls, but especially right at the beginning, as much as possible, be face to face and say, this is what we're all about, this is how you can help us accomplish that and more.
Tammy?
Make choices about day-to-day investments based on their consistency with the principles that you care about.
Yeah.
Do something with them. Never eat alone. Eat with them, and do things with them. Do real work with them, because you very quickly reach out to a very large number of people.
So I think that leadership shouldn't be in hierarchy, it should be circular. So I think that they absolutely have to spend the time. I think they have to role model the behaviors, and they have to hold other leaders in the organization accountable when they aren't encouraging a speak-up culture and aren't encouraging diversity and that inclusion.
Thanks. So we started out, I think, at a sort of very high level, meaning, purpose. And what we got down to in the end, and I think the most valuable lesson I think I've learned today, is never eat alone.